This might sound like a crazy idea, but music is actually a direct conduit into the brain. Now, I have been a musician all my life. I started playing the piano when I was 4 years old, have been playing it to this very day. I became interested in how music can really affect the brain and central nervous system, though, about 20 some odd years ago. The story began back in 1994. I had just started teaching at the Chadha Conservatory of the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga here, and had a great group of students. And one of these students had a sibling who was autistic. And the child would sit in the corner and spin around, and she'd kind of go around the corners of the room and butt her head into things. And about once every month, I'd hear her utter a phrase, and it was what they'd call echolalic. She would repeat something, but she never initiated speech. And at this point, she was 4 years old. And her mother then, at that point, said, well, can you teach her to play the piano? I said, well, gee, I'll give it a try. And so I taught her based on what I knew with working with neurotypical children. And I will confess that this was a disaster. And about 6 months later, I was ready to throw in the towel. And that's when the aha moment came. Her mother discovered that this girl was a whiz with computers. And so we loaded notational software onto my computer, we plugged the keyboard in, and this child learned to read music on the computer. And I remember the day that she started her very first piece, Mary Had a Little Lamb, and she was looking up and playing the notes. The hair on the back of my neck stood out. It was unbelievable. And we took her off the computer. She kept reading the music on her own at that point, took her over to the piano, and a really wonderful thing started happening. She started to sing. And as she was singing, all of her verbal capacity really started kicking in. It was amazing. And in first grade, she still had to go to a special needs first grade class, but in second grade, she mainstreamed into a normal class, and she has been going strong ever since. Last time I saw her was right before her junior year when she was at the University of Texas at Austin. Wonderful. So this taught me exactly how powerful music can be when applied directly in ways that we don't really normally think about. So the idea of music influencing the body really isn't anything new. I mean, the ancient Greeks had their modes, what we'd probably call scales now, something like that. And with these modes, some of them were designed to energize the body and uplift you for doing your gymnastics, and some of them were designed to calm down for, contemplative type activities. And the modes continued all through the Renaissance. Music therapy as we know it had its start in the 1900s at the end of World War II, when bands would go around and play at the VA hospitals, and it was noticed that people just felt better when the music was played. Everybody felt better. They didn't know why, they didn't know how, but they felt better, just, not just enjoying the music. And so that was the start of what became the modern music therapy profession. During the 60s and 70s, music therapy was based much more on social sciences, what was known how to measure at that point. But with the advent of the wonderful technology that we have that can actually do brain measurements, such as functional MRI, in the late 80s and early 90s, neuroscience was introduced instead of social science. So what the research showed is that the brain actually uses music as an ancient natural language. And music is a reciprocal activity in the brain. The brain creates the music, the brain then engages in the music, and as the brain engages in the music, it actually changes and it develops and it grows in something called plasticity, and it keeps going with this cycle. So then we know, through the research, that rhythm is the key on this, the actual rhythm of what's going on in the body. There is no rhythm center in the brain. Rhythm is a part of the central nervous system, and therefore, various elements of the brain could actually be damaged by disease or accident, but you can use music and rhythm to help redirect and get into this neuroplasticity to regrow the brain. What works with rhythm? It is time-ordered, it is structured, it is intrinsic. The brain knows what to expect. Why is it intrinsic? What do we have going on? We have a heart rate, right? And that is generally mirrored with how fast our gait is. So we can tell, really, all the intrinsic parts of music in our bodies. So this led to the discovery of what's called biomedical music techniques or neurologic music therapy. And all of these techniques were developed by a terrific group of people at Colorado State University Center for Biomedical Research in Music between the years 1994 and 2015. And they developed all of these wonderful techniques that were based on motor, speech, or cognition. Now, how do we get all this to work? I'm going to show you an example of something called entrainment. If everybody could just tap a finger on your lap, tap a toe, find your own natural rhythm, what's going on with all that stuff. And now watch what happens. It is very hard to resist this, right? Okay? So that is entrainment. Your muscles jump in and just want to move with this. And everything is wanting to work with the music on this. It's fascinating how it works. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these motor, speech, and cognition issues. And the first thing I want to do with motor is show you a video of a young man that I worked with several years ago. At the time, he was 7 to 8 years old, moderate to severely autistic, and he had cerebral palsy. He had kind of a tremor in his hand, and you'll see he kind of had a kinetic stutter to his gait. And this is all very goal-oriented work. One of the first things we wanted to do was really work with his gait, because we're born to walk, right? This is exactly what we do. And so we wanted to help fix this gait. And so the very first time that I started working with him, we tried to get him to basically step on time in a beat and raise his knee, step, raise, because children with autism often are not aware of their own space. That's why we wanted to add the knee raise to this. So this is when we first started working with him. 1, 2, ready, go. Wheels on the bus go round and round with those knees. Round, round with those knees, good. Wheels on the bus go round and lifting the knees. Lifting the knees. You can see he knows he needs to bend his knees in order to lift them, but he doesn't have the capacity here to be able to do it, because he's trying. So then, 10 weeks later, he had no other intervening therapy, no physical therapy, no occupational therapy, no drugs. I saw him 2 to 3 times a week, and we had gotten him to the point where he could not only walk on the beat, but we introduced the knee raise along with a slap of the opposite hand to opposite knee, because this simulates what we want with gait. Okay, knees high, here we go. So you can see this is a really remarkable improvement. And the goal on this is not let's walk in time to music, the end goal. The end goal is let's get everything stronger so we can have a normal gait. And about 2 to 3 weeks after this last video was shot, this young man was shown in an article in the local paper here, bowling. He was able to bowl for the first time in his life. He was strong enough to do that. And 2 years later, he actually took part in the track and field events of the Chattanooga Special Olympics, which was wonderful. So, speech. Let me tell you a story about another little girl. I met her when she was 3 years old. A physical therapist friend of mine who works over at Siskin Rehabilitation Hospital called me up and said, "You got to come over here and see this kid." And I said, "Well, okay, sure." Well, she had hydrocephalus. She was legally considered blind deaf and cerebral palsy. And they sat her, this 3-year-old who couldn't see and couldn't hear, they sat her down at a piano, and I saw her do picking out all the F's on the piano. How could a child who couldn't see and couldn't hear do that? And I thought, this is a remarkable kid. And her mother asked if I'd start to work with her. She was very medically fragile, so it took 2 years to do that, and we started working with her on this. And she was progressing beautifully. And this was a wonderful thing. I kind of worked tactile with her hands, and then 3 or 4 weeks later, the song would pop out and she'd start to play it. And again, the same thing happened with her with the singing. She had kind of like her own little language, but suddenly some English words were popping out. But unfortunately, she had a seizure 9 months later. And this was devastating, and she was put into hospice at this point, which was horrible for all of us. And so I asked her mother, I said, you know, do they know what happened? Well, evidently her oxygen levels were down way too far and they couldn't bring her oxygen up. So I said, well, is it because something else is wrong, something else is missing? She was actually a drug baby. That was the source of her problems. Or is it because she's hunched over most of the time like this, and so she's not getting the air? Ask her doctors if we can work with her. And so we did. We spent the summer having her play drums out like this so that she could bring her chest up, and harp, and singing. And the singing was the key on this girl. It was amazing. This girl developed a set of iron lungs. You could hear her singing 2 blocks away. Unbelievable. And as she sang, her oxygen levels came up, and guess what? 10 months later, she was out of hospice. They remained up. So this is the power of speech with singing and music. Cognition, this is an interesting one. One of the biggest problems there is like kids who won't pay attention to something. So I'm going to show you a little exercise. You get to participate. I want everybody to do what I'm doing with these claves, but just clap, okay? Clap along with me. Right, beautiful. So I have your sustained attention. Do you see how all of a sudden you were really focused on me? Okay? Now, let's try something else. Could I get my hecklers coming down here? Do I have hecklers up there? Ah, I hear hecklers, yes. Okay. The hecklers, we're going to do the exact same thing, but on this, I'm going to try to get you to do selective attention, okay? Because what happens whenever we have like kids in a classroom sitting trying to learn and the door opens and all the heads swing out, okay? What we're doing now is saying, okay, don't pay attention to the thing that you shouldn't be paying attention to, pay attention to me. We're going to do it again. Hecklers commence. Beautiful. Yes. All right. Thank you, hecklers. So you see, what we've just done here is we've done a motor, a speech, and a cognition technique. We've used music, and these are non-musical areas of the brain. Music is multi-hemispheric, and so it can reach into all kinds of areas that we wouldn't think about. So think about the possibilities on this. We could take a child with autism, or even a neurotypical child, who was trying to learn the alphabet, and they're like A, C, B, but suddenly they hear, and suddenly A, B, C, D, E, F, G makes sense, okay? Think about a woman who had a stroke. She's working on getting her left arm kind of rehabilitated, and one of her occupational therapy exercises is to reach up like this so that she can get to the counter effectively. And so she has to do this, and it's really difficult. But what if we just add rhythm to it? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. She's a lover of classical music. So then we add this to it. Up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. perfect. We have somebody with Parkinson's just diagnosed, and his gait is normally like this. That's the pace he walks. Parkinson's is something that we cannot really do regenerative work on, but we can make quality of life better, because if an auditory beat is heard with a Parkinson's patient, that kind of creates an assist network to substitute for what happened in the brain that's starting to deteriorate. So this guy's a Monty Python fan, so we play Always Look on the Bright Side of Life. So we're playing to the person's preference on this. And imagine the possibilities then when we open up the network and say, let's get the doctors, let's get the therapists, let's get all of these people together. We need the neuroscience information, we need the behavioral information, we need the knowledge about the patient, we need the caregivers to jump in on all this stuff, we need the musical knowledge. Let's all get together and create a facility where we can really do this and come out where we can even create more research based off of this. The research is fabulous now, but Chattanooga can be a place where this can really happen. The entrepreneurial attitude in Chattanooga is fabulous. So this talk is called Dance of the Neural Tango. And what would a dance of the neural tango be without hearing a tango? And so I'm going to play a short part of a Piazzolla tango for you, and as much as audience decorum allows, just feel free to move and see what it does to your body, and imagine, gee, that part of my body wasn't moving as well before. So here's a crazy idea. Why isn't this part of the mainstream? Let's make it part of the mainstream. And by the way, let's get the computer developers involved too so that we can automate some of this. Thank you so much for your attention.